Welcome to Practical Access. I'm Lisa Dieker.
And I'm Rebecca Hines. And Lisa, it's good to be back together. I know we've been working on our own projects, some together, some apart. And I know you're especially excited about this season.
I know. So we're really excited. What we're trying to be is, I think, a gap filler, which is kind of fun in the field. We have a big national project that we've been working on together called FLITE STEM Coaching, which helps math and science coaches work with special ed teachers. And this season is about filling in places that we didn't find a lot of resources in the math and science areas to help teachers work with kids with disabilities. So it's not focused on how to teach math and science. It's focused on how to help kids with disabilities that might be in a math and science classroom. So do you want to say anything more about FLITE STEM Coaching? I know you've done a lot of work with the coaching part too.
No, I love the model. And I think those of you who look into it when it becomes available will like it too, because it does provide opportunities for teachers to really focus on specific strategies and specific practices to get the results that you want. And part of our mission is to help you start with some of these strategies as you think about your STEM classes today. So Lisa, give us a strategy.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about inquiry classrooms where kids are doing most of the talking, which you and I both believe should be happening all the time. But how do we group kids when we want them to talk? And there's nothing better than saying, oh, let's do think, pair, share, and kids don't want to pair, or we put them in cooperative groups and 4 is too many. And so we're going to just kind of talk a little bit about how to be flexible when you're doing math and science, which we both believe, especially math, needs to be more discourse than what we often see. It's not a stand and get anymore, it's talking. And we see curriculum going that way, but we really need to be thinking about how to group students. So do you want to lead with your first suggestion, Becky? And then I'll kind of go from there.
I will go by the simple principle of, how are we going to group them in the first place? And, there's all kind of random picker online tools to randomly put people in group, but there's other times that we want to be strategic in how we decide who's working where. So I think the obvious one that most teachers kind of rely on sometimes is by readiness and by what students understand, what they don't understand. Do we pair someone who is an emerging learner with an expert so that they can see it? Or is it better to push each other by having experts with experts and really lean into a challenge? There are times for both, in my opinion, but readiness isn't the only thing to consider. A lot of times, and this isn't necessarily true in math, unless we're strategic about what the assignment is. But, grouping students by interest is a good way to let them explore and be excited about topics with other people who are excited about the same topics. So my first challenge to teachers is to think about whether it's having students work on different problems to solve instead of everybody working on the same problem or project. And even in math, if we're asking students to have dialogue and to talk about math, what are they purposefully doing with it? So I recommend that teachers think about how we can have groups that are working on the same standard, but might have a different topic, and we let them group by interest.
Yeah, and I love, again, I'll go back to one of the most effective strategies in our literature that I just live by, which is cooperative grouping. And I think math sets itself up beautifully for jigsawing. So you send kids out to all do 4 different problems. They get with their friends that are doing the same problems, make sure, and then they go back and teach. And yet I think we both agree this is a really important time to be thinking about kids with language-based needs that might have trouble talking, kids who might have communication devices, and kids who might struggle with dyscalculia, with the ability to do the math. And so, math is one, science is another. And I like your thoughts, if you're doing biomes, like kids pick their biomes. And choice is great, but I do think you have to be careful If you have a really diverse classroom, we know best practice normally for grouping is one high, one low, two in the middle. But again, that might be high behavior if you're in a lab, because now we have to worry about the social part of that, where it might be high academics if it's really a hard academic task. So I think grouping is something that should be fluid, but if it's inquiry based, we really have to think about adding those layers for kids with any language challenges.
I'm going to push back on you just a little bit here, Lisa. I agree with everything you said, and I agree that the traditional wisdom is to have one person who's higher, one person who's lower, two people somewhere in the middle. There is also research that shows that when we use that, then people fall into predicted patterns. And so if I'm working with people who are at my own level, uh, someone is rising to the top. So, I think for me as a teacher, the goal is to figure out when I want to have these differentiated and when I want to have people working in a group so that they feel comfortable and confident, and we create some emerging leaders among the ones who may have been the middle of the pack, air quotes, or the more novice learner. So I do think that there's room for all of those. And then another grouping consideration um, is the idea, especially at the secondary levels, of having a group of one. Can I choose to work independently while other people work in groups? And I know that goes against the nature of some teachers, but sometimes when we give choice, we get more buy-in. We can identify who is it that's struggling to fit into a group. And we can scaffold that and coach them into choosing partners other times. But I do think that student choice is important. And I feel like there are times that we can offer students choice of partners. And I also think there's times that we can offer students choice to work independently or work with a partner.
It's funny too, because those of you who don't know us on this podcast, we love to disagree with each other. We put up favorite things to do. And what's funny is we hardly ever really disagree. We just disagree to agree. And so I'm going to start by agreeing with you that I definitely do think you want grouping. And I think that's why one of the things you and I both love is co-teaching in these kind of settings where we can do enrichment and remediation. And that
Right.
the same kids all the time. I know we've talked about the tap back strategy of tapping the kids who could be pushed and what have you. One other strategy, and then I want to talk about the single grouping because I disagree a little bit there, but it's because of the topic of inquiry. But with the grouping strategy, one I learned from an algebra teacher years ago, literally, I don't even know how long it is anymore, was to put kids in numbers, letters, and shape groups. And I even do that in my college class. And so when there's a number up on the wall, you go to your number groups and that way I can think through grouping ahead of time. But what I learned from her is her shape groups were where she did her differentiated grouping. And she said to her students, hey, when you get in your shapes, know you're going to be doing different tasks. And that's where she could purposely think about the kid who needs to be enriched with, a 2 grade level above versus who needs some remediation time with her. And so I think, that's the kind of stuff you want to think about so that it isn't, oh, crumb, who am I grouping with? Because that can be really stressful for some kids. And then as far as a group of one, I don't have a problem with that. I do struggle a little bit with it in inquiry based, but I know we talked about, it could be the teacher talking with the student. It even could be an AI agent talking with the student. But if we're really talking about STEM and inquiry, there's a rule I call the 90-10 rule. 90% of what the teacher talks about, kids forget. And 90% of what they talk about, they remember. And so I would want that student to have some way of either writing or talking or using a communication device to share their thinking, even if they're going to be by themselves, which I completely respect and has to happen.
Sure. And I agree with you. There still has to be an expectation of sharing the information and asking questions. But for those kids who are either uh, communication averse, let's just say, kids who do not want to talk. And we know there are kids, all levels of abilities who fall into that category. Um, I look at this as almost a scaffold so that I can find information. The expectation is I'm still sharing it after I've found it. And I think that you build in the inquiry piece by designing the lesson so that here's the assignment. If you choose to work independently, you must have 3 questions to ask the teacher as you're working because you still need that expert um, feedback. So I'm not trying to discourage communication or inquiry, but I do think kids need very specific scaffolds. And I think sometimes when we just put them in groups with no choice, some don't ever fully engage, even they don't even try. So I'm always willing to try anything and try to get people working at whatever way we need to.
Yeah, and I do think the future is you're gonna be working more and more with AI agents, so getting comfortable to that to some level. Well, I have 2 more things. I'm gonna ask you one, but then I would like to talk a little bit about assessment, but I do think when you mentioned it already, when kids are in inquiry groups, you really do have to be assessing because I think sometimes kids can get in groups and talk, but we know we know who would talk in my group, it'd be me. So again, how do we give kids differentiated roles in those groups to hold them accountable, not only to assess their learning, but to really give them a structure and clear expectations. So is one drawing, it is quite often in my class, one drawing with the whiteboard, one's using wiki sticks to show it, the other is running the lab material or doing the math problems and the calculator, and one is getting ready to talk with the group. But I do think that if we don't have structure and expectations, it's a struggle. And that is your bailiwick. So what would you say to me? I'm a new teacher and I'm about to put kids in lab for the first time, and it involves breakable things and kids who like to break things. What would you tell me?
Well, I think the word that I like to use now is evidence. And I use that in my pre-service teacher classrooms. I use it when I'm training teachers. I'm using it when I'm in a school and working with kids. I ask them to show me the evidence of what you've done, show me the evidence of what you've learned. If it's the lab, show me the evidence that you understand the protocol here. And we have to be patient and willing to not only ask, but to watch and listen to ensure that a student can perform that skill. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of classrooms anyway, honestly. So, this idea of evidence, maybe it's photo evidence, maybe it's something you've designed with the wiki sticks, but show me evidence. I teach master's level courses and I say, show me evidence that you read this. So, I don't need a summary from you because that's not evidence anymore. So either meet with me and tell me, or show me visually somehow that you have actually done this. So I think we rely on that very specific word, and then we design a structure where we're asking for oral evidence or asking for physical evidence of every single thing we expect kids to master, whether it's rules or whether it's content.
Yeah, and I'll just share that my last thought would be is to maybe think about if you're kind of lost in how to get structure in those roles or assessment ideas. I would go out and use some type of generative AI model, whether it's Copilot, Google Gemini, and ask questions like that. I've been doing that with teachers all the time. My favorite prompt now is explain, Eli, explain like I'm 5. And you could have that student who is a 10-year-old but struggling say, hey, why don't you be the person who gets us ready to tell, if we were going to tell a kindergarten class? My second favorite prompt is humanizer. So I was just doing this with the black hole, and I said, make the black hole humanize. And said the black hole is like a trampoline. What goes in it can go through or it can bounce out, depending on, I was like, wow, that's or like a vacuum cleaner that it sucks things in. I was like, oh, both of those are really helpful to me as a teacher. The same true for structures. But I really think our big assessment, it should be more performance based and oral or picture based. And, filling out a worksheet and writing the lab steps down, that was great before AI could do it all for you. That can be produced in 3 seconds. So keep asking yourself, what could kids do differently? Last thoughts from you, Becky.
Nope. On that, we wholeheartedly agree. We know from writing about AI, working with AI, we've been using it for a long time. I encourage us to really look for better and deeper understanding of our content. And I do think that happens through orally having to explain it. So everybody is doing kids a service when we start asking them to say what they know. It's also increasing their communication skills.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. And if you have questions, you can tweet us at Access Practical or post a question on our Facebook page. Thanks.